everyone, my name is Rebecca and welcome back to... Okay, I gotta take this thing off, it doesn't feel right. Today we're going to be looking at the second Gatiss Holmes adaptation, Billy Wilder's The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes. Mark Gatiss and Stephen Moffat have said time and again that this film, along with the Basil Rathbone Nigel Bruce version, was the main influence for BBC Sherlock. I was going to refer to the fact that even though they said in July of this year that all print interviews on The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes were garbled mistranslations, we have an older video of Mark talking about the film which proves that he at least likes it. But this last week a short interview came out with Mark and Stephen being interviewed by Stephen's son Louis, and let's just say they're not pretending that they hate Private Life anymore.
What is your favourite film?
God, I wish I'd chosen a film with a shorter title. Done.
I think Mark said The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes.
I think Stephen said The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes.
Both reveal at the same time?
That is beyond tragic.
Amazing.
You guys only had to hold out for a few more weeks. I mean, I appreciate you making my life easier here, but what was the point of doing all of that if you're just gonna backtrack before the big reveal even happens? You guys are losing your edge. Now the thing is, if you haven't seen The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes, if you love the film, it's for one reason: the tone. Mark talked about this a lot when he introduced the film at the BFI.
This is by a long way my favourite Sherlock Holmes film, and really, although it's difficult to say what's your definitive favourite film, it's probably my favourite film. I think it sort of does everything I want a film to do. I saw it when I was very young and it profoundly affected me. I think it's both a brilliant, respectful homage to Conan Doyle and yet an incredibly irreverent take on it. It's a funny thing, I actually introduced this film about 3 or 4 years ago at a book festival, and I spent the whole time talking about how wonderfully melancholy it was. And then it started, and I thought, I'd forgotten, it's incredibly funny. It's definitely got its heart is melancholy, and I think that's what Wilder did best, and it's certainly always the thing that I respond most to in anything, is a sort of bittersweet quality. So the parody is so sublime, but at its heart, it's deeply touching. It's a very personal work, I think, and a very profound one.
So if what Mark and Stephen like most is that moving, melancholy tone, we need to see what exactly makes the film so heartbreaking. That's where Billy Wilder, the film's director and one of the writers, comes in. If you aren't in the know, it's possible to watch Private Life and come away with the impression that Holmes falls in love with Ilse von Hofmannsthal, the agent who outsmarts him. You're completely wrong if you do this, for the record. And for Private Life, you don't have to rely on subtext to work that out. In later years, Billy Wilder was extremely outspoken about what he wanted to do with the movie. You've heard this before, but here it is again. I should have been more daring with The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes. I wanted Holmes to be homosexual and not admitting it to anyone, including maybe even himself. The burden of keeping it a secret was why he took dope. We've been freed of the Breen office now, but that was after I made Private Life. The saddest thing about the film was that it was a waste of 1.5 years of my life. When you get to be my age, you say, shit, if I could just have the time back I wasted on pictures that were failures. But I'm not ashamed of it. There are many pictures I wish I could scratch out, but this one, I'm not ashamed of. So Billy Wilder wanted to tell the story of a gay man, wasn't able to at the time, and his only regret with the film was that he didn't stick to his intended goal, that he wasn't more daring. In the film's existing form, the love story is still there, but as Mark Gatiss has so aptly said, it is desperately unspoken. And that is where the beauty of the film comes from, and why it stays with you. Because the story doesn't really resolve by the end of the film, and you're left kind of hoping that something will fix it. But in this censored version, nothing does, and it's heartbreaking. Mark Gatiss and Stephen Moffat are also setting out to tell a love story between Holmes and Watson, and they're giving it a long build-up to parallel the years the world has waited for this version of the story. For the story so far, the tension has been building and and building, but there's no resolution yet. While the writers have borrowed lots of details from the film, the main influence The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes has had on BBC Sherlock is its tone and the focus of the story. The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes isn't about a case, but about Watson obsessing over Holmes's heart. Holmes and Watson's unspoken feelings for each other are the heart of the film, just as Sherlock and John's feelings are the heart of the BBC show. And the heavy influence that the tone and focus of Private Life have had on BBC Sherlock is a clue that BBC Sherlock has the same goal that The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes did. And like Wilder said, we're free of the Breen office now, so this time there will be resolution at last. What we'll be doing here is going through The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes, and I'll be doing my best to point out the similarities in tone and narrative focus, as well as pointing out the details that BBC Sherlock has used in their version, and what that means for the episodes that use them. A lot of the details will be familiar to you if you watched the video I did on A Scandal in Belgravia, but it's worth going over them again in this context. So the premise of The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes is that Watson wrote secret records of his life with Holmes that couldn't be read until 50 years after his death.
Somewhere in the vaults of a bank in London is a tin dispatch box with my name on it. It is not to be opened until 50 years after my death. It contains certain mementos of my long association with a man who elevated the science of deduction to an art. The world's first and undeniably most famous consulting detective.
Right away, it's obvious how much better this premise would have worked with Billy Wilder's original intent. Again, if this is your favorite movie, it's for reasons like that, knowing what it could have been. In this opening sequence, we see a very familiar image.
That watch that you're wearing.
There's a photograph inside it. I glimpsed it once. I believe it is of Irene Adler.
One of the major points of the film is that Holmes doesn't fall in love with Ilsa. So if the writers use this visual reference for Irene, it's because they want to hint that Sherlock is likewise not in love with her. You'll notice as we go through this that most of the plot elements were either put in The Abominable Bride or in A Scandal in Belgravia. For The Abominable Bride, the fact that Sherlock's subconscious closely resembles a film where homosexuality had to be repressed and censored is a bit telling. For the other, making the Irene Adler episode a retelling of The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes is a blatant giveaway. It was their chance to confirm that Sherlock liked women, and they didn't. Instead, they borrowed from the gayest Sherlock Holmes movie. And it's not like Belgravia is just an episode that Stephen happened to churn out, and he borrowed heavily from Private Life's plot because he was running out of ideas.
The next question is, what piece of writing are you most proud of?
The 11th Hour. That was the trickiest script you've ever had to write. Is that your proudest? Oh, I know. Yes. I'm going to say A Scandal in Belgravia.
Correct.
That's right. Out of all of the writing in his entire career, Stephen Moffat is most proud of what he did in A Scandal in Belgravia, and hopefully by the end of this video you'll understand why. The movie can be easily divided into two sections. The first section is by far the more blatant, and is crucial for understanding the events of the second. As Watson talks about the many cases he's shared with Holmes in a manner similar to John's narration in The Abominable Bride, he talks about matters of a delicate nature, a line which made its way into A Scandal in Belgravia.
In my lifetime, I have recorded some 60 cases demonstrating the singular gift of my friend Sherlock Holmes, dealing with everything from the Hound of the Baskervilles to his mysterious brother Mycroft and the devilish Professor Moriarty.
Over the many years it has been my privilege to record the exploits of my remarkable friend, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, it has sometimes been difficult to choose which of his many cases to set before my readers.
But there were other adventures which, for reasons of discretion, I have decided to withhold from the public until this much later date.
Some are still too sensitive to recount, whilst others are too recent in the minds of the public.
They involve matters of a delicate and sometimes scandalous nature, as will shortly become apparent.
A matter has come to light of an extremely delicate and potentially criminal nature, and in this hour of need, dear brother, your name has arisen.
This first scene was lifted almost line for line into The Abominable Bride, which again establishes that Sherlock's subconscious has a lot in common with this film, for some random reason.
Mr. Holmes, I do wish you'd let me know when you're planning to come home.
I hardly knew myself, Mrs. Hudson. That's the trouble with dismembered country squires. They're notoriously difficult to schedule.
I wish you'd give me a bit more warning when you come home unexpected. I'd have roasted a goose, had a few flowers for you.
My dear Mrs. Hudson, criminals are as unpredictable as head colds. You never quite know when you're going to catch one.
You're going to notice that Robert Stevens' portrayal of Holmes is a bit, I think Mark said it best.
And what's really interesting is that, that Robert Stevens is by no means anyone's idea of Sherlock Holmes. He as you'll see, it's a curious portrayal. It's very camp, actually.
Of course, we know what else Mark associates being very camp with.
You can be a very camp, gay person,
Yeah, remember this film was one of their biggest inspiration, and both of their favorite film. In this scene, we also get hints that Watson is presenting Holmes in an unrealistic way in the stories, which is something that the BBC writers have played around with a lot, and naturally lends itself to a queer reading of the original stories.
Here's an advance copy of Strand magazine. They printed the Red-Headed League.
And I notice you've published another of your stories, Dr. Watson.
Yes, did you enjoy it?
No.
Very impressive.
Would you like to see how I've treated it?
I can hardly wait. I'm sure I shall find out all sorts of fascinating things about the case that I never knew before.
Just what do you mean by that?
Oh, come now, Watson. You must admit you have a tendency to over-romanticize. You've taken my simple exercises in logic and embellished them, embroidered them, exaggerated them.
I deny the accusation.
I never enjoy them.
Why not?
I never say anything, do I? According to you, I just show people up the stairs and serve you breakfast.
Well, within the narrative, that is, broadly speaking, your function.
My what?
You have described me as 6'4", whereas I'm barely 6'1".
A bit of poetic
You
license.
saddled me with this improbable costume, which the public now expects me to wear.
That is not my doing. Blame it on the illustrator.
You make the room so drab and dingy.
I'll blame it on the illustrator. He's out of control. I've had to grow this moustache just so people will recognize me.
This scene also sets up a seemingly insignificant case that actually plays into the big overarching plot, something Stephen borrowed for a scandal in Belgravia.
Look at this. An urgent appeal to find some missing midgets.
Did you say midgets?
6 of them. The tumbling piccolos, an acrobatic act with some circus.
Disappeared between London and Bristol. Well, don't you find that intriguing?
The circus owner offers me £5 for my services. That's not even a pound a midget. So obviously he's a stingy blighter and the little chap simply ran off to join another circus.
She's not my real aunt. She's been replaced. I know she has. I know human Ash.
Leave.
They wouldn't let us see Grandad when he was dead. Is that because he gone to heaven?
People don't really go to heaven when they die. They're taken to a special room and burned.
Sherlock.
There's a plane crash in Dusseldorf yesterday. Everyone dead.
Suspected terrorist bomb. We do watch the news.
He said boring and turned over.
According to the flight details, this man was checked in on board. Inside his coat, he's got stub from his boarding pass, napkins from the flight, even one of his special biscuits. Here's his passport, stamped in Berlin airport. So this man should have died in a plane crash in Germany yesterday, but instead he's in a car boot in Southwark.
Lucky escape.
Holmes ends the scene by yelling at Mrs. Hudson for dusting and upsetting his filing system.
Mrs. Hudson!
Yes. What is it? What have I done now?
There is something missing from my desk.
Missing?
Something very crucial.
What?
Dust! You have been tidying up against my explicit orders.
Oh, look, I made sure I hadn't disturbed anything.
Dust, Mrs. Hudson, is an essential part of my filing system. By the thickness of it, I can date any document immediately.
You need to ask about the dusting. Precise details in the last week. What's been cleaned?
Well, Tuesday I did your lino.
No, in here, this room. This is where we'll find it. Any break in the dust line. You could put back anything but dust. Dust is eloquent.
What's he on about?
See, some details did make it into other episodes. The next scene is where things start to get more interesting. Holmes is doing a study of tobacco ash, and Mrs. Hudson says it's pointless.
Please, Mrs. Hudson, he's working on a definitive study of tobacco ash.
Oh, I'm sure there's a crying need for that.
I've written a blog on the varying tensile strengths of different natural
I'm
fibers.
sure there's a crying need for that.
He's apparently using this study and cases to distract from his desire for drugs. He claims very early on that it's only to alleviate boredom.
My dear friend, as well as my dear doctor, I only resort to narcotics when I'm suffering from acute boredom, when there are no interesting cases to engage my mind. She's right, I am suffocating.
Oh, let me open the window.
Not from lack of air, from lack of activity. Sitting here week after week, blowing smoke rings, staring through a microscope. There's no challenge in that.
Personally, I consider it a major contribution to scientific criminology.
How I envy you your mind, Watson. You do? It's placid, imperturbable, prosaic. But my mind rebels against stagnation. It's like a racing engine tearing itself to pieces because it's not connected up with the work for which it was built.
Since the BBC writers were holding off on drugs use until things got really serious, this scene was placed into The Hounds of Baskerville and was made to be about cigarettes rather than drugs.
Nothing.
Military coup in Uganda. Another photo of you with the. Cabinet reshuffle.
Nothing of importance. Oh, God! John, I need some. Get me some.
You don't understand. Go after her and apologize.
Apologize? Oh, John, I envy you so much.
You envy me?
Your mind, so placid, straightforward, barely used. Mine's like an engine racing out of control. A rocket tearing itself to pieces, trapped on the launch pad. I need a case!
You've just solved one by harpooning a dead pig, apparently.
That was this morning. When's the next one?
If anything, the true nature of Sherlock's agitation is more blatant in the BBC version, because like we know from that Billy Wilder quote, Holmes is actually taking drugs to repress his sexual desires. This reading isn't even dependent on that interview. It's pretty clear in the scene. When the study of tobacco ash doesn't prove distracting enough, Holmes picks up his violin to play for Watson, knowing Watson likes the violin. But then abruptly he stops. He goes for his case instead. And Watson tries to stop him, asking where his self-control is, and Holmes says it's a good question.
Holmes? Holmes? Where's your self-control? Fair question.
They're having two separate conversations here. The next exchange makes that clear.
Aren't you ashamed of yourself? Thoroughly. But this will take care of it.
He's ashamed of himself, but he's taking the drugs to take care of it. He was playing the violin trying to woo Watson, then got frustrated at himself for his lack of self-control, and takes cocaine to numb his feelings. It's tragic. If you're watching this film seriously enough for it to be your all-time favorite film, you know all of this. We can infer from the way Mark borrowed this scene in The Hounds of Baskerville that Sherlock is facing a similar dilemma at that point. This also applies to Sherlock's drug relapse in Series 3. Mark and Stephen include it for the same reason that Billy Wilder did. Sherlock takes drugs to deal with the pain of his feelings. Then we come to the infamous ballet scene. This is simultaneously my most and least favorite part of the movie. Holmes and Watson receive free tickets to the final performance of the Russian ballet doing Swan Lake.
But this isn't just any ballet. It's Swan Lake.
We see in the scene that Watson is apparently aggressively heterosexual, which is a problem that Sherlock also thinks he's facing in A Scandal in Belgravia.
Fabulous woman. Didn't you think so, Holmes?
Any plans for New Year tonight?
Nothing fixed. Nothing I couldn't heartlessly abandon. You have any ideas?
Who? The great Petrova.
Very strong archers, I must admit.
They say 12 men have died for her.
This woman is beautiful, so much so that 12 men died for her. But when asked to comment on her beauty, all Holmes does is comment on her high arches while she's dancing. That is, not a straight response. And they actually managed to use that line in BBC Sherlock.
Oh, you liked her. A woman of rare perception.
And admirably high arches. I noticed them as soon as she stepped into the room.
Holmes is busy being sad about Watson drooling over this dancer when the owner of the ballet company comes up and tells Holmes he's wanted backstage after the show.
Tell me, Mr. Holmes, how is your health?
My health? Better consult my doctor.
Oh, he's in excellent shape.
Any insanity in your family? Diabetes, asthma?
would you mind telling me what this is all about?
Certainly. Madame Petrova. She has problem. After performance, there will be little celebration backstage. And Madame requests your presence.
When they go backstage, Watson starts flirting with more women, and Holmes is taken to see the main dancer in her dressing room.
The Comtesse Doctorum Watson.
When Petrovia meets Holmes, he's apparently not what she's expecting, and this line will sound familiar.
Очень приятно.
Madame.
Вы меньше ростом, чем я ожидала.
Madame says you are shorter than she thought.
Oh, I didn't mean to be.
And Mr. Holmes the younger. You look taller in your photographs.
The flower arrangements in her dressing room should also be familiar. They stole those for John's wedding.
Ah, yes.
As we get through the scene, you're going to see why that's hilarious. Petrovia offers Holmes a Stradivarius for his services on the case, and Holmes is taken aback, wondering what could be worth such a high payment.
Judging from the shape, the color of the varnish, and the tone, I would say it is a genuine Stradivarius of the best period.
You like?
Oh, it's magnificent.
Николай, скажите ему, что это подарок от меня.
Here, take it. Madame says it is yours.
Mine?
For services you will render.
My fees as a detective are not exactly trifling, but a Stradivarius, you're not serious.
I am not. But Madame is.
The owner explains what Petrovia wants, and Holmes gets even more uncomfortable.
So Madame has decided to leave ballet and spend life bringing up her child.
How admirable.
Problem is, how to find father.
Oh, is he missing?
Correct.
And that's why you've called me in?
Also correct. We must have father, because without father, how could there be child?
I see. The whole thing is still in the planning stage.
Correct again. Madame would like child to be brilliant and beautiful. Since she is beautiful, she needs man who is brilliant.
За здоровье!
За здоровье!
За здоровье.
Keep in mind, this is a very beautiful woman who 12 men died for, and Holmes is being offered a very expensive violin just to sleep with her for a week. He'd need a pretty good reason to be unwilling to take her up on that. And yet, he's extremely hesitant, saying he's not a good candidate. The owner talks about some of their first choices, and Holmes agrees with all of them, saying they're better choices than he is.
Madame would like to know when you can be ready.
Ready?
To leave for Venice. All the arrangements have been made. You will spend 1 week there when Madame...
This is all very flattering, but surely there are other men, better men.
To tell truth, you were not first choice. We consider Russian writer, Tolstoy.
Oh, that's more like it. The man's a genius.
Too old. Then we consider philosopher, Nietzsche.
Oh, absolutely first-rate mind.
Too German.
And when they get to Tchaikovsky, the composer of Swan Lake, things get really interesting.
Then we considered Tchaikovsky.
Oh, you couldn't go wrong with Tchaikovsky.
We could, and we did. It was catastrophe.
Why?
We don't know. Because Tchaikovsky, how shall I put it, women, not his glass of tea.
Oh, pity that.
As I talked about pretty early on, the way they've incorporated that glass of tea line is pretty subtle, but it's still enjoyable. The owner confronts Holmes, asking if he thinks that Petrovia is attractive, and in that moment, Watson bursts into the room.
Madame says you talk too much. You find her attractive or no?
Well, oh, excuse me.
Again, we've seen this before.
I wish you weren't... whatever it is you are.
Holmes realizes that the easiest way to get out of it is to say that he and Watson are in a relationship, and so he lies.
You find Madame attractive or no?
Oh, I find her most attractive. For a woman, that is.
Then no problem.
Maybe a slight one. You see, I am not a free man.
Not free? But you are bachelor.
A bachelor, living with another bachelor for the last 5 years. 5 very happy years.
What is it you are trying to tell us?
Well, I hoped I could avoid the subject, but some of us, through a cruel caprice of Mother Nature...
Get to point.
The point is that Tchaikovsky is not an isolated case.
You mean you and Dr. Watson? He is your glass of tea?
If you want to be picturesque about it.
But remember, he's lying to get out of sleeping with a very beautiful woman with the enticement of a Stradivarius. There's clearly some truth to this, even without the knowledge that Billy Wilder interview gives us. He leaves saying that he'd rather disappoint her now than later.
Believe me, madame, the loss is all mine. But I would rather disappoint you now than disappoint you in a gondola in Venice. It would have been catastrophe.
Going back to the flower arrangements, they were placed at the wedding reception where John and Mary were about to leave to go on their honeymoon. We can infer that it was a catastrophe. Also, Petrovia was trying to get pregnant on that trip, but we'll see how that element all plays out in a few weeks. Holmes leaves the dressing room and tries to get Watson to leave with him, but Watson is having too much fun dancing with women.
Watson! Watson, are you coming? What is it, all right? We're going home. Home? Not a chance! Not the slightest, not the remotest chance to do!
Holmes clearly doesn't want to leave him there to learn what he told Petrovia, but he doesn't have much of a choice. The owner comes out and spreads the news that Holmes and Watson are lovers. The male ballet dancers are particularly interested in this news. Now for some very blatant imagery. The line of women Watson is dancing with here is slowly replaced by men, and Watson here is equally happy dancing with men and women until he registers that other people can see him. But when he's not worrying about that, he's just as content dancing arm in arm with men as he was with women. It doesn't feel wrong to him. He just cares a lot about appearances.
Just one moment.
When he goes to the owner to ask what's going on, he says he doesn't have to hide. That this kind of thing is more common in some circles.
You don't have to pretend. Mr. Holmes told us everything. About you and him.
About me and him?
Come on, no need to be bashful. We're not bourgeois. Maybe between doctors and detectives is unusual, but in ballet, it's very usual.
Okay, so if this is their favorite film, and one of the main inspirations for BBC Sherlock, and if in this film, being gay is very usual in ballet,
I'll let you learn something, Janine.
Go on then.
I love dancing. I've always loved it.
Seriously?
Watch out.
Ooh.
It's too obvious. Also notice that Watson doesn't seem to pick up on what's happening until the owner mentions the bisexual Sergei.
What is it?
Caprice of Mother Nature. Look at Pavel and Misha, Boris and Dmitri and Ilya and Sergei. Sergei, half and half.
He didn't want a drink, he needed one. He's not embarrassed. He's afraid.
Watson is very concerned about his reputation, so he gets furious about this. He storms home and hurls insults at the chair where he thinks Holmes is sitting.
Holmes! There you are. You wretch! You rotter! You blackguard! Of all the vile, unspeakable fabrications! What do you have to say for yourself?
But when he actually throws something and it looks like Holmes is injured, he drops the anger instantly and is filled with concern.
Well, don't just sit there! Speak up, man! Holmes? Are you all right, Holmes? Holmes?
Why could that be? He realizes it was a trick and asks Holmes how he could lie about something like that. When he says it was to spare Petrovia's feelings, Watson asks about his feelings, his reputation.
How could you invent such a dastardly lie? What the deuce were you thinking of?
Watson, you have my most abject apologies. But have you ever been cornered by a madwoman? It seemed like the only way to get out of it without hurting her feelings.
And what about my feelings? And my reputation?
Again, he's very concerned about word of this getting out there, especially to his old war friends.
Do you realize the gravity of what you've done? The possible repercussions?
So there'll be a little gossip about you in St. Petersburg.
These things spread like wildfire. I can just hear those malicious whispers behind my back. I'll never be able to show my face in polite society. I never ever got back to my old regiment. You don't know the 5th Northumberland Fusiliers. They'll strike me off the rolls. They'll cut off my pension.
Watson, you're running amok.
Solid disgrace, ostracized.
He's much more worried about what other people will think than the implication itself. It's almost like this is a touchy subject for him. Holmes, on the very hand, is very calm about the situation. He doesn't seem to mind others thinking he likes men. Watson suggests that they get married, just to dispel the rumors, which is already a lot, considering Mary Morstan and everything around her. But Holmes takes it in an even more painful direction.
Oh, you may think this is funny, but we're both in the same boat. We must take desperate measures. We must stop this talk. Maybe if we got married.
Then they'd really talk.
This film has a lot of gay jokes, the way BBC Sherlock has a lot of gay jokes, which is to say...
So not just a cheap gay joke, in fact, a supervillain.
No.
You get the impression here that maybe part of the reason Holmes did this was to test the waters with Watson, and it isn't going well at all. Watson insists that they can't live together anymore, and Holmes talks about having tragic romantic meetings.
Obviously, we cannot continue to live under the same roof. We must move apart.
Of course, we can still see each other clandestinely, on remote benches in Hyde Park and in the waiting rooms of suburban railway stations.
Then Watson apparently comes to his senses and realizes that there's no truth to the rumors. Almost like he had somehow forgotten that.
This whole thing's ridiculous. We have nothing to hide.
That's what I've been trying to tell you.
Let somebody start a rumor. Just one ugly word.
Holmes tries to further calm him down by reminding him of his reputation with women.
After all, you have an enviable record with the fair sex.
Damn right. I can get women from 3 continents to testify for me, and you can get women to vouch for you too, can't you, Holmes?
But then we come to the problem. Holmes doesn't have a reputation with women.
Can you, Holmes?
Why did you get so close to him there, Watson? What are you doing? What are you doing there? That's very straight of you. Holmes hovers there too and gets just a little bit closer before he walks away without answering.
Good night, Watson.
Then we come to mine and Mark's favorite part of the film. Probably Stephen's too, but I don't know for sure. Watson tries one last time to quell his fears by getting an answer from Holmes, and Holmes comes as close to the truth as he could in 1970.
Holmes? Let me ask you a question. I hope I'm not being presumptuous, but there have been women in your life?
The answer is yes. You're being presumptuous. Good night.
And after all of that, Watson's response here is to quietly call after him, almost like he regrets his reaction. Like this information changes something. But they don't get anywhere here, and they don't talk about it.
Holmes!
That's one of the most important parts of Private Life. So let's talk about how this scene has influenced BBC Sherlock. There are a handful of scenes that I'd say take heavy inspiration from this moment. The unifying factor in all of them is that John's reaction is very different from what it was in Private Life. Like we saw in The Abominable Bride, Mark and Stephen don't think that Wilder understood Watson.
Thank you, Wilder.
The scene most directly inspired by this is the greenhouse scene in The Abominable Bride, where instead of being motivated by a nervous preoccupation with what other people think, John initiates this conversation with Sherlock because he wants to know about his impulses, and he's worried about Sherlock not acting on them.
You're a living, breathing man. You've lived a life. You have a past.
What?
Well, you must have had...
Had what?
You know.
No.
Experiences.
Pass me your revolver. I have a sudden need to use it.
Damn it, Holmes, you are flesh and blood. You have feelings. You must have impulses.
And remember, this is taking place in Sherlock's head. By extension, then, there's also the Angelos scene, where because it was the modern day, John could directly ask if Sherlock liked men. And Sherlock responded by saying he knew having a boyfriend was fine, despite saying that girlfriends aren't his area.
You don't have a girlfriend, then?
Girlfriend? No, not really my area.
All right. Do you have a boyfriend? Which is fine, by the way.
I know it's fine.
So you've got a boyfriend?
No.
Right, okay.
I think, though, the scene that most matches the tone of this moment is the Battersea scene in A Scandal in Belgravia, where John starts the scene filled with jealousy and anger and deflecting Irene's implications.
What do I say?
What do you normally say? You've texted him a lot.
Just the usual stuff.
There is no usual in this case.
Good morning. I like your funny hat. I'm sad tonight. Let's have dinner. You look sexy on Crime Watch. Let's have dinner. I'm not hungry. Let's have dinner.
You flirted with Sherlock Holmes.
At him. He never
Now,
replies.
Sherlock always replies to everything. He's Mr. Punchline. He will outlive God trying to have the last word.
Does that make me special?
I don't know, maybe.
You jealous?
We're not a couple.
Yes, you are.
But ends with a revealing lack of response to a direct question about it.
Who the hell knows about Sherlock Holmes? But for the record, if anyone out there still cares, I'm not actually gay.
Well, I am. Look at us both.
In Belgravia, Sherlock is the one to realize John's feelings for him. But it has the same consequence. John is left wondering over the nature of his heart.
Listen, has he ever had any kind of girlfriend, boyfriend, a relationship ever?
I don't know.
How can we not know? So she's alive then. How are we feeling about that?
Happy New Year, John.
Do you think you'll be seeing her again?
What indeed was his attitude towards women? Was there some secret he was holding back? Or was he just a thinking machine, incapable of any emotion?
Mark and Stephen care very much about having that conversation about Sherlock's true feelings and John's preoccupation with them. Those are both crucial elements of the love story they're presenting. The second portion of the movie revolves around the case of Ilse von Hofmannsthal. And if you've been following this series, you already know about the many parallels between this part of the film and A Scandal in Belgravia. I'm going to cover them again here because in context you really understand the purpose for the end of that episode. Ilse is brought to Baker Street under the guise of being a distressed client.
Well, what have we here?
Who are you, miss? What happened to you?
don't know.
It's all a game to her. She never reveals her true colors. And her only interest in Holmes is the challenge of going up against the best. Irene plays a very similar role in A Scandal in Belgravia, and we can assume then that her character, like Ilsa, has no feelings for Holmes. She's set up like a mystery for Holmes to solve. The German government is exploiting Holmes' love of a good mystery, just as Moriarty does when he sends in Irene.
Young lady, what did you want at this address?
I do not remember.
Rather perplexing, wouldn't you say?
Rather.
All the photographs are on here, I presume.
I have copies, of course.
No, you don't. You'll have permanently disabled any kind of uplink or connection. Unless the contents of this phone are provably unique, you wouldn't be able to sell them.
You said I'm selling.
Well, why would they be interested? Whatever's on the phone, it's clearly not just photographs.
In private life, Holmes clearly isn't happy that she's there.
Watson, this is a very small flat. We don't want to clutter it up with women.
Again, they managed to slip this line into BBC Sherlock.
Mrs. Hudson, there is a woman in my sitting room. Is it intentional?
They put Ilsa to sleep, and Holmes wants her gone as quickly as possible.
Holmes, we've never had a case like this. A woman comes to us with a problem. We don't know who the woman is. We don't know what the problem is. Don't you find that challenging?
Quite. But we can't afford to wait for these veils to lift. We must break through them as quickly as possible.
You really feel it's that urgent?
I do. The sooner we solve the case, the sooner we can get rid of her.
Ilsa knows this, and she also wants to get under his skin so she can do her job. So she confronts him while naked in an attempt to unsettle him. This should sound familiar.
Emile. Is that you, Emile?
Yes, Gabrielle?
Hello, sorry to hear that you've been hurt. I don't think Kate caught your name.
I'm so sorry. I'm...
Oh, it's always hard to remember an alias when you've had a fright.
Oh, Emile. I thought I would never find you. Oh. Hold me tight. It's been such a long time. So many nights.
Well, there now. We're both defrocked. Mr. Sherlock Holmes.
Miss Adler, I presume.
Do you know what I did before I left Brussels?
What?
I hope you're not going to be angry with me. I bought myself an expensive negligee.
Did you?
A pink negligee. With marabou feathers. Don't you think it's a little bit foolish for a married woman? Come. Come.
Where is the negligee?
In my luggage. Come here.
And where is your luggage?
I don't know. Come, my love. Come here.
Look at those cheekbones. I could cut myself slapping that face. Would you like me to try?
Ilsa's invitation for sex is much more urgent than Irene's, who seems to know it's pointless. But even in private life, Holmes completely ignores her in favor of the clue on her hand.
Please. Oh, please. Come here. What is it, Emile? What are you doing?
This is like in A Scandal in Belgravia, where Sherlock is both annoyed at her flirting and only looks at her to try to get a read on her. Holmes then leaves Baker Street to follow that lead, and Watson goes into Holmes' bedroom only to find a naked Ilsa sleeping in his bed.
Holmes! Holmes! She's gone!
Well, I never.
This scene gives us some insight into why John was smiling when they found Irene in Sherlock's bed in A Scandal in Belgravia. If Sherlock finds her there, assuming she's a client, that means they haven't slept together yet.
Hey, Sherlock.
We have a client.
What, in your bedroom?
Watson, meanwhile, gets seriously jealous, and Holmes plays into it, making the situation worse with vague phrasing.
You can't really blame her. I mean, the way it looks. If I didn't know you better, I might suspect you'd taken advantage of the young lady.
As a matter of fact, I did take advantage of her. Would you hand me the butter knife, please?
Of course. You did what?
Thank you.
Holmes, this is reprehensible. Where are your professional ethics? Have you no sense of decency, no shame?
None whatsoever. If you must know, I found her body quite rewarding.
You can't!
Especially the palm of her right hand.
I'd rather not hear about it.
This, too, we've seen before.
So, just a guess, but you've probably got some questions.
Yeah, one or two, pretty much.
Naturally.
You have a girlfriend?
Yes, I have.
You have a girlfriend?
What? Yes, I'm going out with Janine. I thought that was fairly obvious.
Yes, well, yes. But, I mean, you are in a relationship?
Yes, I am.
You and Janine?
Yes, me and Janine.
Care to elaborate?
Well, we're in a good place. It's, very affirming.
You got that from a book?
Everyone got that from a book.
Unless I meet someone prettier.
He eventually reveals he was only tracing her suitcase, much to Watson's relief. Again, we've seen this.
Hear about it.
Very well, then I won't bother to tell you how I traced her suitcase.
That's her suitcase?
That's the Pink Lady's case. That's Jennifer Wilson's case.
Yes, obviously.
Remember that piece of soggy cardboard with our address on it? It was a luggage ticket. The number had rubbed off on my hand. And since she must have arrived from Brussels by the boat train, I concluded that she had checked her belongings at Victoria Station.
Ilsa then comes out, her memory apparently mostly restored, and asks who is Holmes and who is Watson.
Good morning, Madame Valadon. You are Gabrielle Valadon?
Yes.
And this is your husband, Emile Valadon.
Yes.
Sorry to have ransacked your valise, but since you came to us for help...
Where am I?
221B, Baker Street.
Oh, yes. Which one of you is Sherlock Holmes and which is Dr. Watson?
Dr. Watson is the handsome one.
Oh.
That's the way he affects most women.
Yeah, he has that effect on Holmes, too. At least we haven't had to see that line. Yet. They could still do it. There's still time. Ilsa pretends to remember just enough to be helpful.
You came to London looking for your husband, right?
Yes. He's a mining engineer. We were married 5 years ago in the Congo.
Where your husband was working in a copper mine.
How did you know?
Your wedding ring is made of copper.
He invented a new kind of air pump and was hired by an English company, Journal Limited. We've been writing to each other regularly, then suddenly, 3 weeks ago, his letters stopped. So finally, I decided to go to that address.
32 Ashdown Street.
Yes. It's just an empty store. Nobody there. So I tried to find Journal Limited. Then I went to the Belgian embassy. They suggested I should consult you.
You could have done worse.
I was on my way here. And suddenly there were footsteps behind me and a hand over my mouth and the smell of chloroform. And the next thing I knew, I was in the water. And then a man was wrapping me in a blanket.
Madame Valadon, somebody tried to kill you last night. Do you have any idea who could have done it?
I don't understand any of it.
So who's after you?
People who want to kill me.
Who's that?
Killers?
Would help if you were a tiny bit more specific.
And they follow the next lead to where she was sending her letters to her husband. Once there, instead of finding Emile, they get an urgent message from Mycroft.
Mr. Holmes, this letter.
What about it?
It is addressed to you.
To me?
That's impossible. We sent it ourselves.
Nevertheless. My dear Sherlock, I expect you and Dr. Watson to join me at the club immediately upon receipt of this note. According to my calculations, that should be at 11:40 a.m. Your brother Mycroft.
This scene got worked both into A Scandal in Belgravia and The Abominable Bride. Mycroft then warns them off the case, just like Mycroft tries to in A Scandal in Belgravia. And like in that episode, it only fuels Holmes' curiosity.
It has come to my attention that you are interested in the whereabouts of a certain engineer.
Yes, I am.
Well, I can save you a lot of trouble.
I'd be grateful for any suggestion.
My suggestion is that you pursue it no further.
For any particular reason?
Because it involves the national security. We are handling the matter ourselves.
We? Who's we? The Diogenes Club, of course.
I didn't say that.
I've always suspected there was some kind of underground connection between this stodgy and seemingly calcified establishment and the Foreign Office in Whitehall.
That is neither here nor there.
It seems to me the Diogenes Club is here, there, and everywhere. When there are rumblings of revolt in the Sudan, an expedition subsidized by your club conveniently shows up to study the source of the Nile. When there's trouble along the Indian frontier, some of your fellow members pop up in the Himalayas, allegedly looking for the abominable snowman.
Sherlock, when I said drop this case, it was not merely a suggestion, it was an order.
By whose authority?
By the authority of Her Majesty's government. I hope I have made myself clear.
What else does she have? Irene Adler. The Americans wouldn't be interested in her for a couple of compromising photographs. There's more. Much more. Something big's coming, isn't it?
Irene Adler is no longer any concern of yours. From now on, you will stay out of this.
Oh, will I?
Yes, Sherlock. You will.
Mycroft also makes a comment about Holmes' lack of understanding about sex, which, surprise, also made its way into A Scandal in Belgravia.
What a vivid imagination my brother has. At the age of 5, by carefully observing a neighbor's house, he deduced that babies were brought not by the stork, but by the midwife, in her satchel.
As good an explanation as any.
Dominatrix.
Don't be alarmed. It's to do with sex.
Sex doesn't alarm me.
How would you know?
Finally, in the middle of this scene, Mycroft gets a message about his plan, which gives Holmes clues that will be essential for solving the case, which again was incorporated into A Scandal in Belgravia.
Tell them that the 3 boxes go to Glenahurick and the Red Runner goes to the castle.
Bond heiress go. That's decided. Check with the Coventry lot. Talk later.
Holmes isn't dissuaded from taking the case, even though Watson is, and works out a plan to get them to Scotland to further investigate by pretending to be married to Ilsa, which makes Watson angry and jealous all over again.
At 7:30, Mr. Holmes and Dr. Watson will be seen waving goodbye to Madame Valadon at Victoria Station. At 8:12, Mr. and Mrs. Ashdown, accompanied by their valet, John, will appear at Euston Station and board the Highland Express to Inverness.
Mr. and Mrs.
Thank you. I'm sorry for what I said.
That's not necessary.
I'll go and pack.
Maybe I should do it, since I'm the valet. Holmes, exactly what are you up to?
As you like to put it in your chronicles, the game is afoot.
But what game? Are you really that interested in the Belgian engineer? Or is it the wife of the Belgian engineer?
Ilsa points this out, like Irene does.
You don't like me very much, do you?
You jealous?
She distracts Watson so she can signal the enemy out the window, again like Irene.
Here it is.
Thank you.
On the train, Holmes insists that Ilsa close her curtains while he's getting dressed. Ilsa comments on it, and Holmes mentions that he slept with hundreds of women for a case in a harem.
All right, you can look now.
Am I embarrassing you, Mr. Holmes?
Not at all. Would it surprise you if I told you I once spent a night with 121 women?
Oh?
On a very interesting case in a harem in Constantinople.
He then starts talking about women he's been involved with.
The most affectionate woman I ever knew was a murderess.
Oh?
It was one of those passionate affairs at odd hours right in my laboratory. And all the time behind my back, she was stealing cyanide to sprinkle on her husband's steak and kidney pie.
You mustn't judge all women by...
Of course not. Only the ones I was involved with. And I don't just mean professionally.
But if he really had been involved with any women, he would have told Watson that in the first act. So this is just a fabrication to keep her from guessing the truth. In Scotland, they find the 3 boxes.
Boxes! Is that it, Holmes?
I would think so.
The 2 small ones. They must be children's coffins.
The seemingly insignificant case about the circus performers from the first scene becomes much more important to the overarching case, which again is something that Stephen borrowed.
If they're unidentified graves, why are those boys bringing flowers?
Because it's their brothers who have just been buried.
The brothers?
And they're not boys. They're as tall as they'll ever grow. Hand me some pebbles.
Pebbles?
Take a look at their faces.
I still don't see what...
Would it help if I told you they were acrobats?
Not at all.
Do you remember a tumbling act? 6 brothers missing from the circus.
That case you turned down. I completely forgot.
Some of us are cursed with memories like flypaper, and stuck there is a staggering amount of miscellaneous data.
You've been stumbling around the fringes of this one for ages. Or were you too bored to notice the pattern?
They wouldn't let us see Grandad when he was dead.
She's not my real aunt. I know human Ash.
We ran a similar project with the Germans a while back, though I believe one of our passengers didn't make the flight. But that's the deceased for you. Late, in every sense of the word.
The more mythical elements of the film, meanwhile, made their way into The Abominable Bride. The Loch Ness Monster was just translated into a ghost.
What do you believe? Well, you may think I'm an old fool and old drunk, but I've been living around Loch Ness all my life.
Are you trying to tell us it was the monster?
It was her. It was the bride.
Ilsa points out that if the 2 small graves weren't for children, the larger grave couldn't have been their father. And they dig up the grave to find the truth. They find a meal, and Ilsa plays the grief-stricken widow for sympathy.
Holmes! She's fainted!
Back in the hotel, Watson spies the Loch Ness Monster. And when Holmes says he's being ridiculous, Watson points out that he said that he has no imagination whatsoever. A line given to John in The Abominable Bride.
But the fact remains that I saw something out there.
A figment of your imagination. Now, let us be logical. The only concrete lead we have is the reference to the castle. The question is, which castle?
You call yourself logical? You're the least logical man I know.
Am I?
How can you say it's a figment of my imagination when for years you've been saying I have no imagination whatsoever?
But we know who it was. I saw her.
Watson.
I saw the ghost with my own eyes.
Saw nothing. You saw what you were supposed to see.
You said yourself, I have no imagination.
Investigating a killer wife is a lot more on the nose than the Loch Ness Monster. Let's just say that. Holmes ignores this for now, and they decide to follow the hint of Mycroft's other message and look for the Red Runner in the castle. Watson again gets jealous when Ilsa and Holmes are riding on a tandem bike. Eventually they go on a picnic, and Watson naturally refers to Holmes like they're partners. You'll also notice that Holmes apparently made Watson the valet just so he could call him John.
Would you like some more cranberry sauce, dear?
Yes, dear.
Would you pass the cranberry sauce, John?
Since when do you call me John?
You'd be surprised.
No, I wouldn't.
Yes, dear.
They eventually find the right castle, but they can't get in. Again, Holmes uses the excuse to call Watson by his first name.
John, would you mind clasping your hands, please?
Like that?
No, like that. Lower. Thank you.
They go out to explore the lake and apparently do actually encounter the Loch Ness Monster, which capsizes their boat.
Holmes! Get back! Get
They go back to the hotel to dry off, and Holmes is summoned away to find out the truth of what's really happening, in a scene very similar to one towards the end of A Scandal in Belgravia.
Mr. Ashdown, I have a bottle of champagne for you. A bottle of champagne? I didn't order it.
No, indeed. You are to deliver it. Those are my instructions.
Instructions from whom? Deliver it where?
I wouldn't know, sir. But there's a carriage waiting for you downstairs.
Are you sure you've got the right Mr. Ashdown?
Quite sure, Mr. Holmes.
Sherlock, this man was at the door. Is the bell still not working? He shot it.
Have you come to take me away again?
Yes, Mr. Holmes.
Well, I decline.
I don't think you do.
It turns out that Mycroft is the one who summoned him, and Holmes explains what he knows.
We found them floating in the lake.
Speaking about things floating in the lake...
How much do you know, or think you know?
I think you're testing some sort of underwater craft. Camouflage to mislead the gullible. I think it's an experimental model operated by a crew of midgets. I think it is powered by sulfuric acid batteries and uses canaries to detect escaping gas. Altogether, a unique contraption.
Not quite that unique. Right now, 4 countries are trying to develop what we call a submersible. But none of them could solve the critical problem, how to stay submerged long enough to make it effective.
What does the good book say? And Jonah lived in the belly of that fish for 3 days and 3 nights.
That was our goal. And thanks to Valadon's air pump, we got a jump on the rest of them.
There's going to be a bomb on a passenger jet. The British and American governments know about it, but rather than expose the source of their information, they're going to let it happen. The plane will blow up. Coventry all over again. The wheel turns. Nothing is ever new.
The Coventry conundrum. What do you think of my solution? The flight of the dead.
Plane blows up midair. Mission accomplished for the terrorists. Hundreds of casualties, but nobody dies.
Neat, don't you think?
How's the plane going to fly, of course? Unmanned aircraft, hardly new.
It doesn't fly. It will never fly. This entire project is cancelled. The terrorist cells have been informed that we know about the bomb.
But then Mycroft reveals that Holmes has been tricked and was working for the enemy.
Before they could reach the surface, Valadon and 2 of the crew were dead.
So you had them buried in unmarked graves to preserve your secret?
It was essential to keep the information from your client.
You went to all those lengths to prevent Madame Valadon from finding her husband.
Your client isn't Madame Valadon. It's the Imperial German government. They were after the Belgian engineer, or rather his invention. They knew he was employed by us, but they couldn't find out where. So they enlisted the best brain in England to help them. You, my dear brother, have been working for the Wilhelmstrasse.
We've lost everything. One fragment of one email, and months and years of planning. Finished.
Your MOD man.
That's all it takes. One lonely, naive man desperate to show off, and a woman clever enough to make him feel special.
You should screen your defense people more carefully.
I'm not talking about the MOD man, Sherlock. I'm talking about you.
Again, they exploited Holmes' love of puzzles to their advantage, just like Moriarty does.
The woman who was brought to your house in the middle of the night, apparently fished out of the Thames, and apparently suffering from amnesia, is in fact Ilse von Hofmannsthal, one of their most skillful agents. Am I going too fast for the best brain in England?
Go on.
They planted her on you quite neatly, I must admit, so that you could lead them to their objective, the air pump. Very much like using a hog to find truffles.
A damsel in distress. In the end, are you really so obvious? Because this was textbook. The promise of love, the pain of loss, the joy of redemption. Then give him a puzzle and watch him dance.
Don't be absurd.
so Holmes is outsmarted by Ilsa, and Mycroft also loses when the Queen gets involved. Even though his plan to build a submersible was successful, the Queen vetoes it, saying his plan is unthinkable and he's ordered to destroy the ship.
HMS Jonah is being commissioned as a warship.
A warship?
It can seek out enemy ships and destroy them with those torpedoes while remaining completely invisible.
You mean it can fire at other vessels while underwater?
Yes, ma'am.
Without any warning?
That is correct, ma'am.
Without showing her colors?
Indeed, ma'am.
Mr. Holmes, we are not amused. It is unsportsmanlike, it is un-English, and it is in very poor taste. We will have none of it.
I beg your pardon, ma'am.
Sometimes we despair of the state of the world. Get rid of it. Scuttle it. The sooner the better.
I bring this up because I think Wilder might have been using Mycroft the same way Mark and Steven do, as a stand-in for the writers. All of his carefully laid plans are ruined by one person in power saying he's not allowed to do it. Just like Billy Wilder and his original intent for the film. Mycroft decides to make the best of the situation, and at least use this as an opportunity to get rid of some spies.
Well, Mycroft, it seems we have both been undone by a woman. What a shame. All that superb engineering and all that cunning espionage for naught.
Not necessarily. If the Germans want that submersible so badly, why don't we give it to them?
Give it to them?
Invite them aboard for the final journey. 700 feet. Straight down.
Holmes goes back to the hotel where Ilsa is sleeping naked again to entice him, the way Irene feigns attraction towards the end of A Scandal in Belgravia.
Let's have dinner.
He tells her that he knows everything, and she reveals that she was only in it for the challenge.
It's so funny. I asked for this assignment, you know. I was scheduled to go to Japan, but I couldn't resist the challenge of coming up against the best. I'm sorry I didn't give you a closer game.
Everything I said, it's not real. I was just playing the game.
Again, this is her true motivation, and we can assume it was also Irene's. Irene is also afraid for her life, but we talked about that. But neither of them were in love with either Holmes. Holmes apparently wins here, but he still wants to keep Ilsa safe, because he respects her intelligence and the fact that she outplayed him, and because deep down he is actually an empathetic person. When Mycroft comes, he reveals that Sherlock talked him into trading her for another spy.
You're not going to jail. You're going back to Germany.
Germany?
You will be conducted to the Swiss-German border and be exchanged for one of our agents, a man named Ibbotson.
Thank you.
Oh, don't thank me. Thank my brother. It was his idea.
Mycroft also mentions that she's a better agent than any of his.
Frankly, I think we're making a very poor deal. You're much better than most operatives working for British intelligence. Don't you agree, Sherlock?
And better than some consulting detectives.
You've been very thorough. I wish our lot were half as good as you.
Watson is confused and out of the loop in this scene, and he's left to assume that Holmes saves her for romantic reasons.
All right, Holmes, you don't have to explain anything to me if you don't want to.
I appreciate that, Watson.
After all, I'm only your official biographer.
Anyway, I don't think she would care to have this story spread all over the Strand magazine.
The public has a right to know these things. If she's a German spy, why should we concern ourselves about her feelings?
Especially with the goodbye message.
Look, Holmes, if I promise not to write a word about it, would you enlighten me as your friend, as your valet?
Quiet. I'm trying to read a personal message.
Message? What you saying?
Auf Wiedersehen.
Here's where the great difference between the two stories starts. At this point in the plot in A Scandal in Belgravia, Sherlock leaves Irene in her distress. He doesn't try to save her at first.
Please. You're right. I won't even last 6 months.
Sorry about dinner.
That sets up the change for the ending. Months later, Holmes gets a letter from Mycroft informing him of Ilsa's death, and the fact that she was going by Ashdown at the end of her life. Holmes doesn't react well, and Watson has to read the letter when it's left on the table, rather than getting the information from Holmes.
Aren't you going to finish your breakfast?
Stephen made the intelligent choice of having John be more involved in this moment. This story is actually about Watson wondering about Holmes's heart after all. So in A Scandal in Belgravia, John is given the choice of whether or not to give Sherlock the information that Irene has died.
I am about to go and inform my brother, or if you prefer, you are, that she somehow got herself into a witness protection scheme in America.
He'll be okay with this witness protection, never seeing her again. He'll be fine.
I agree. That's why I decided to tell him that.
Instead of what?
She's dead. So, what should we tell Sherlock?
He decides to spare Sherlock's heart and lie to him.
She's in America.
America?
Mm-hmm. Got herself on a witness protection scheme, apparently. Don't know how she swung it, but, well, you know.
I know what?
Well, you won't be able to see her again.
Why would I want to see her again?
Didn't say you did.
But Sherlock strongly hints that he knows the truth anyway, and John is filled with regret.
Did she ever text you again after all that?
Once, a few months ago.
What she said?
Goodbye, Mr. Holmes.
In private life, Watson tries to offer his condolences, and Holmes just asks for his case. Watson tells him where his drugs are hidden.
Holmes, I'm terribly sorry about this.
Where is it, Watson?
In the files. May to July 1885.
You're getting better.
Holmes takes the drugs to his room and shuts himself inside, leaving Watson still wondering about the truth. We know that Holmes is gay and never loved Ilsa, that this is just another failure that will haunt him, that he probably feels like he would have done more to save her if he had loved her and not Watson. But Watson doesn't know that. In the living room, Watson takes up his pen and writes what he believes, and nothing here is resolved. It's a deeply haunting final note. Every time I see the end of this film, I find myself wishing I could change it. To have one moment where we know that Holmes will move past this, that he won't shut himself in forever, that there was some small triumph here, a twist. The conclusion I usually come to is that Holmes wouldn't have to shut himself away with his guilt if he had somehow saved Ilsa. Why doesn't someone write it that way? But A Scandal in Belgravia appears like it's going to end on the same melancholy note, with John pushed away, knowing nothing, and Sherlock apparently grieving Irene's loss. But then Stephen makes the greatest diversion from the private life of Sherlock Holmes. And this is why I think he's so proud of the episode. He gives the story resolution. Because Sherlock is an empathetic and caring person, of course he'll try to save Irene. And because he didn't do so at first, that means he'll be there in the true hour of need. So what's shaping up to be an ending just as tragic as Private Life's is switched right at the last moment, and it's revealed that Sherlock saved Irene.
When I say run, run. The woman. The woman.
This gives the story more than resolution, it gives it hope. Sherlock can still have a future after this. Because he saved Irene, she won't haunt him forever. He can revel in his secret victory and then shut her away and move on with his life. Something Holmes in Private Life will never be able to do. And of course, giving this small part of the narrative a resolution is foreshadowing. The truly unresolved element from the Private Life of Sherlock Holmes is the desperately unspoken love between Holmes and Watson. Because Stephen finally brought the narrative arc of that film to a satisfying conclusion, we know that that long-ignored relationship will also finally be addressed in this story. While Mark and Stephen have drawn heavily from this heartbreaking, melancholy tone for this part of the narrative, we know from the end of A Scandal in Belgravia that the show won't end that way. There's a happy ending in sight. You could even say that John finally understanding what's in Sherlock's heart, that he was only ever in love with him and that he will always choose him, is the final problem the narrative has left to overcome. And it won't be a problem for much longer. Thank you very much for watching this video. I consulted several interviews for making this video, and I'd like to thank the wonderful Skulls and Tea for originally finding most of them. You can support the show by contributing subtitles or by becoming a patron on Patreon. Links to both of those can be found down below, as well as links to all the references. In the next few videos, I'll be focusing on Moriarty and his big plan, the people he has influence over, and what that means for what the writers are doing. Basically, you're getting a 3-part explanation of M theory. So I hope you're looking forward to that. Until then, thank you for watching, and get ready to believe.